Okay, this is section 2 of chapter 10, biodiversity and valuation. And this is all about cost benefit applications. And just as a beginning here, this is all about given that we can decide which species to preserve or not. What are some ways in which we might consider which to preserve and which not? Given that we do it, we kind of sort of do it already. Now, there's a great quote at the beginning of the section. I'd like to read it to you by Andrew Metrick and Martin Weitzman in 1998. At the end of the day, all the brave talk about win-win situations, which simultaneously produce sustainable development and conserve biodiversity, will not help us sort out how many children's hospitals should be sacrificed in the name of preserving natural habitats. Goodness. So yeah, definitely opportunity cost comes into play. Now, on the other hand, new subdivisions come at a high environmental price as well, so it can go the other direction. Um, you know, opportunity cost always goes in both ways. The housing, transportation, diet, and material possessions common in development countries all come at a high environmental price. And here's a good line here. In some cases, biodiversity loss results from a conscious decision to substitute a set of material assets for a set of natural assets, like a forest or its inhabitants. Now, trade-offs are not necessarily monetary, but it is possible to try to monetize them, and we do this only to get a common yardstick, a common measuring stick to look at this issue of value and cost-benefit analysis. Um, Now, species preservation can also have a high opportunity cost in terms of lost forestry and fishing. Um, Commercial interests, and I know this in California. Um, um, Interests in fishing, lodging, and transportation have been held at bay by the preservation of species of whales, woodpeckers, and snakes, respectively. As more and more species are preserved, more and more expensive steps must be taken in the name of biodiversity. And while the costs of preserving might increase, the benefits might likely decrease. Now, additional species can provide large benefits, but the more species that exist, the less of a contribution each additional species makes to available diversity, decreasing marginal benefit. Um, and he actually talks about the species with the top priority for preservation, presumably Homo sapiens. Um, and let's see what we, yeah. Um, Now, there's no reason to think that the species with the largest marginal benefit of preservation is also the species with the smallest marginal cost. Some species are arguably more important than others, which can justify the preservation of species that are not necessarily the least expensive to preserve. So we can, if we like, we can make some decisions on this. And now the next section is a way and method to kind of apply this, and it's called the Noah's Ark model. And these are two recent studies. So, like Noah, we have some control over what species can survive on the ark we call Earth, and the task of prioritizing species to board the ark, given limits of space, time, and money, involves the fourth variable, the increased likelihood of survival attributable to protection. So the ratio is what we've got right there, and it's in your book on page 242, same as in the fourth edition. It's D plus B times S divided by C. D is distinctiveness of the of the species. B is direct benefits. S is the percentage increase in survivability due to preservation. And finally, C is the cost of preservation. Now, are we putting the right species on the ark? The same authors, Metrick and Weitzman, collected data on the 4 criteria of the Noah's Ark model and examined whether actual rankings corresponded with the logic of the model. Okay. They then measured society's actual measure for the model, and it turns out that humans are not rational. What a surprise! And we place a high priority on cuddly creatures relative to others. The findings indicate that humans place a high priority on large, cuddly, charismatic megafauna, such as bears and cats. More surprisingly, they suggest that society spends more money on less endangered species than on more endangered species, and expenditures do not increase significantly for more unique species. Further, and this is very interesting, society is more likely to spend money on an animal whose preservation conflicts with development plans than on those who can be saved at a lower cost. So the conflict, we like to take sides of saving species versus the conflict with development. So there is a possibility of saving a species and still have development and actually have something akin to a win-win situation. And yes, society spends more money on less rather than endangered species. And like I just said, society is more likely to spend money on endangered species in conflict with development plans than on species that can be saved at a lower cost. Okay, valuing costs and benefits. Value is not just money. Value can come from hands-on use of the species or the resource, the option to use that resource, the ability to leave a resource for others to enjoy, and just very simply the knowledge that certain animals and plants are able to survive. So value comes from lots of different things, and it's difficult to place a monetary dollars and cents on this particular value, these types of values. Speaking of which, types of value. And here is, oh goodness, what do we have here? What do we have here? And it is a caterpillar. I knew that. Now here's some different types of value. We have use value, which comes from the first-hand enjoyment of the resource and its byproducts. Non-use or passive use value. There are others who never enter a benefit and see a particular animal species, but nonetheless place a non-use or passive use value on them. Now, these passive use values can be divided into the option value that people place on the option to use the resource into the future, and existence values that are unrelated to any possibility of ever using the resource or its byproducts. Okay, option and existence value. We have bequest value, knowing that preservation allows others to use the resource, and sympathy value of knowing that the resource is alive and well. And there is values oftentimes measured in people's stated or implied willingness to pay or willingness to accept payment for a resource. Willingness to pay, or WTP, is the largest amount of money she or he would be willing to pay in exchange for the resource. And vice versa, willingness to accept, or WTA, it's the smallest amount of money she or he would accept to forego the resource. And WTA is often higher than WTP. Why is this? Um, because greater wealth leads individual to place higher valuations on goods they desire. Um, so they so they already have it, and so they value the loss far more than getting the resource. So loss means much more than getting the resource. That makes very, very good sense. Okay, and I think this is going to finish this section, and the next and hopefully final section will be on different ways of measuring measuring value. Okay.